Today, we see Magnus Carlsen play against one of the toughest defensive formations against the Jobava London system. His opponent is Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. And this is a bullet game, and some people will say, well, that's not enough time to get a good game. But I can assure you, the quality of this game and these players, the accuracy with which they play, is very educational. If you play the Jobava or you play against the Jobava London, you are going to want to watch this game. Magnus has white, Daniel Naroditsky has black. Let's jump right in. d4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, bishop to f4. This, of course, is the starting position of the Jobava London. Black has a number of different ways of dealing with it. Daniel Naroditsky plays c5, immediately attacking the center, which is one of the best lines Black has against this opening, trying to take advantage of the fact that White's knight blocks his own c-pawn. E3 is played by Magnus. Another line is E4, which can be quite sharp, but Magnus plays a more orthodox approach, E3, CD4, ED4, bishop to G4. So Daniel Naroditsky is getting his light-squared bishop outside of the pawn chain before he plays E6 and closes it. A good idea. F3 has been suggested. I know Simon Williams in one of his programs suggested it. He may have updated that. And he points out that after bishop f5, knight to b5, threatening to come in to c7, knight to a6, and then c3, keeping this knight out of b4, is good for white. And it is. The only problem is this move, bishop to d7, definitely keeps equality for black, controlling that b5 square. So Magnus plays it a little tighter, a little safer. He plays bishop to e2, simply getting the bishop out and putting pressure on the g4 bishop. The bishop takes, and here a very important decision for Magnus, knight c to e2. He takes that knight that was on c3 and moves it, so now this c-pawn has flexibility. And it's very important when you play the Jobava London, you're very much focused on structures. How do I get the kind of structure I want to get the attack I'm looking for? You're not looking for theoretical computer advantages, because against a good player, you're really not going to get those. But you might get this structure you want. Carlsen is aiming for this Carlsbad structure where the pawns point towards the king side. Knight to c6, putting pressure on d4. Knight to f3, e6, c3, and now we have the Carlsbad structure where these pawns point in different directions, and that's often where the play will be carried out for both sides. Daniel Naroditsky plays bishop to d6, challenging Carlsen's bishop on f4, castles, castles, and rook to e1. In this Carlsbad structure, when you have the pawns pointing toward the king side, you often would like to place a knight on this e5 square and maybe support it with f4. You want the rook and the queen backing it up. That's sort of the idea here. So knowing that, Daniel Naroditsky plays the move knight to e4. He sort of clogs things up. He gets his knight to the 5th rank before Magnus does. The question is this a little too ambitious? Magnus takes on d6, queen takes d6, and now knight to g3, immediately challenging the knight on e4. Computers suggest actually returning the knight to f6, but now white gets what he wants. He gets the two knights on the king's side. After, say, queen to e2, you can support a knight moving to the e5 square, and white should get some nice attacking play on the king's side in this position. So instead of retreating the knight, Daniel Naroditsky plays f5, creating a bit of a stonewall formation for black, but these pawns are very rigid. And if they might be able to be attacked. So that's a possibility. It's very double-edged, the decision he's made to put the knight on e4 and support it with f5. Queen to e2. Basically, Magnus is centralizing his pieces and preparing to attack this structure with c4 and hopefully create a weakness on the d5 square. Rook a to b8. Daniel Naroditsky plays the standard idea in this type of structure, preparing b5 and b4, the minority attack, and trying to create a weakness on c3 after the exchange. c4. Magnus bypasses that and immediately attacks the d5 pawn. Now that the minority attack is not in the cards, Daniel Naroditsky plays that rook to e8, centralizing it and placing it opposite Magnus's queen. Rook a to c1, further backing up this c-pawn. Now, it's important to note computers have shown this game to be equal the entire time. The question, again, is not about computer superiority, it's about understanding structure. A6, A3, keeping a knight out of B4, but also possibly expanding with B2, B4 himself and gaining some space. Now, queen to F4, a very interesting and aggressive move from Daniel Naroditsky. Basically, there's no immediate tactical threat with queen to F4. It's just sort of actively posted. You know, he's put the queen on a good active square. The question is it a little too far afield? We'll see. B4 is played by Magnus. Rook to D8, not only defending D5, but also preparing an X-ray attack on D4. Once the pawn moves, he'll be attacking D4 twice. So Magnus takes first. He retakes with the E-pawn. And now B5 for Magnus Carlsen. The idea here basically is to create targets on the queen side. And after AB5, queen B5, he's done exactly that. And we see that Daniel Naroditsky has weaknesses at B5 and at D5 in this position. But he's got a fairly aggressive position as well. Now Daniel Naroditsky, who's one of the top bullet players in the world, I mean, really elite, plays an incredibly strong move here. Knight to D4. A really strong idea. It looks like it's hanging the knight. The problem is this. After knight takes D4, queen F2 check, king H1, and then the queen retakes the knight, and he's got further threats. If Carlsen were to just grab that B7 pawn, you tacticians out there will notice this pattern. Knight F2 check, king G1, knight H3 double check, the knight and the queen check. King F1 would be queen F2 mate, so you play king H1, and what happens? That's right, queen to G1 check, rook takes, boom. The old smothered mate would be in the offing. So knight to D4, a very strong move. Carlsen responds by playing queen to D3, just keeping things centralized, trying to later work on these weaknesses. And now knight takes F3 check, queen takes F3, and here Daniel Naroditsky could have played queen takes F3 and ruined those pawns. I think the only thing maybe in the back of his mind might have been after, say, knight G5, king G2. Both of Magnus's rooks are on open files, and maybe he just wasn't comfortable with that situation, although it's just still an equal position. Instead, he plays the move queen to E5. Magnus plays the queen to B3, again, working on these weaknesses, attacking B7, putting pressure on D5, which is defended for the moment, but pinning that pawn to the king at G8. Rook to D7, defending B7, and here it looks like F3 would be strong with a pin on the knight. The problem is this move, queen to D4 check, and again, if the king were to go to H1, you'd have the same smothered mate we just looked at. So he would have to block with the queen. And after queen E3, rook E3, then this move, F4, forking the rook and the knight and winning material. So instead, Magnus plays rook C to D1, putting pressure on D5, but also controlling the D4 square. So now, after F3, the queen could not deliver check on that square. Unfortunately, Daniel Naroditsky, and this is where bullet does play a role, plays the move rook to E8. The best move here is queen to C3, and that keeps things equal. But rook to E8 does allow the move F3, and now there's no queen to D4 check because the rook covers that square, so the pin is a real problem. The knight is going to be lost. After king H8, Fe4, Fe4, knight E4, he could also play rook takes E4, either way. A knight E4, DE4, rook takes D7. And actually, he didn't allow that. The game was already, he resigned before rook takes D7 was played, and Magnus won. So Daniel Naroditsky did quite well against the Jobava London system, but it was equal the whole way. And just to emphasize, the key is to understand those structures. How do you handle that Carlsbad structure? And then if they play that stonewall, be sure to undermine with C4 to create weaknesses. Thank you for joining us at Chess Dog. See you again soon. Bye.